And we are live. All right. Hey, folks. Welcome to the next live stream. Welcome to the next live stream in our Conservation in Your Backyard program series. Today we're going to be talking about the Hudson River School of Painting, which, interestingly, is one of the first real art movements in the U.S., and started right here in the Hudson Valley. So, what is it? It's America's first artistic movement. It was founded by Thomas Cole, who was a British expat. His family came here from England, moved to Pennsylvania, and then he eventually came up here. Cole took a trip up the Hudson River to see the Catskills in 1825, and that really inspired him. And that's essentially where it all started. The Hudson River School is not necessarily a school per se, it's more of a group of artists with similar intent. The school kind of grew organically between the rise of naturalism to the pressure of trying to do something different from Europe to the rise of nationalism after the War of 1812. There were a lot of factors that helped bring this into existence. The Hudson River School is all landscape painting. Now, this wasn't something that was super popular at the time. It was more portraiture. But the people who ended up participating in this school were so inspired by the Hudson Valley that they wanted to paint it. This is also an outgrowth of the Romantic movement. So these artists tended to paint a romanticized idea of the natural world. So the ideal that, man and nature can totally live together in harmony and nothing bad will ever happen, that kind of thing. Excuse me. There's also a focus on the untouched wilderness, how going into the untouched wilderness was sublime, and that was threatened by the encroaching civilization. Sublime is something so beautiful and so noble that it fills you with awe. This is something that was really popular in the Romantic movement, so it kind of carried over a little bit. So some of the major characteristics of this movement were the subject of the painting is always a large swath of landscape. It's mostly the Hudson Valley, especially the Upper Catskills, but not always. Some of the artists that started in the Hudson River School traveled elsewhere and used that same kind of painting style to paint other places, especially South America. They also represented the actual land, so it wasn't taking piecemeal from different places. There was some leeway, excuse me, there was some leeway in order to make sure that the composition looked okay, but for the most part, it was showing you exactly what this looked like. And these paintings definitely made you feel small. First, any humans, if they were even included, tended to be super tiny to emphasize the grandeur of nature, and I'll show you an example of this in a minute. In addition to this, these paintings are huge, both in scale and size. So some of these paintings are more than 10 feet long, which makes sense because they're extremely detailed. They're also not super symmetrical, which is something different than what a lot of people were doing back in Europe. Symmetry was super popular. But here, they were using more dynamic lines, which makes sense because for the most part, nature is not super symmetrical. That would be creepy. And finally, as I said before, they included the romanticized ideal of man and nature coexisting. And there was a kind of duality that these these painters were grappling with, because they were romanticizing a utopia, essentially, but, trying to acknowledge that that probably wouldn't happen. This started in around 1825. People weren't super kind to the environment back then. And they wanted to focus on capturing the pure wilderness while it still existed. These guys knew that soon enough, people would move into these wild places and make them not so wild and would change what they look like, and they wanted to capture it as it was in that moment. All right. So this is one of the paintings by Thomas Cole from 1838. Now, as you can see, this is a very large painting, actually, and it's a really wide distance that they're painting. You have the tree right here in the front, but you also have in the very back the tip of the mountain and the clouds behind it and the storm that's leaving. Now this is up in Essex County, so a bit north of here, I think. But this is a really good example of how just grand the scale was. So here's another example, also by Thomas Cole. This one's from 1845. Now, a lot of these paintings, because they're depicting so much space, have a really distinct foreground and background split. So the foreground is the stuff closest to you in the painting, and the background is the stuff farthest from you. This type of thing, the fact that there's stuff so close to us and stuff so far away, makes the painting seem even bigger, not just dimension-wise, but depth-wise. Also, it's hard to see, but there is a tiny man near the very center of this painting, right there, who looks to be fishing. I'm not positive. It was really hard to zoom in properly, but this is a really good example at how tiny people are in comparison to the landscape that they were creating. It really does make you feel small. Now, we're going to talk about some of the main artists. These are the three core people, essentially, but there are way more people than this that I just didn't have the time and resources to include. They are more included in my sources, and if you would like any citations, just let me know, comment below, and I can send them to you. But these are the main three. Starting with Thomas Cole. So, living between 1801 and 1848, his family was originally from England, but he moved to Pennsylvania when he was a young man. His paintings were inspired by the beauty of the Catskills, and they caught more attention. They caught the attention of more prominent figures in the New York City art scene at the time, where he wasn't super known. And his fame did spread quickly. And with that knowledge, more people started doing what he was doing. He did travel a bit, going to places like Rome and Germany, but he eventually married and settled right here in the Hudson Valley. His home, called Cedar Grove, is a National Historic Site, and it's in the city of Catskill. Next, we have Asher Durand, who lived between 1796 and 1886. Now, he was one of the people who helped discover Cole as an artist. Before this, Cole wasn't super well known. He was just selling his paintings. But Asher found him and loved his art and was inspired by it, and they ended up forming a really long friendship. In fact, Cole inspired Durand to start painting landscapes himself. He was a portrait, it's a hard word to say. He was an engraver and painter of portraits first. The landscape painting happened later in his life. And along with Cole and, Samuel Morse, another person who tended to live in our area, and a few others, they founded the National Academy of Design, which was an honorary association of artists that actually lasts to this day. And he was president of said association from 1845 to 1861. So not only did he help start this art movement, he really worked to keep it going. Finally, we have Fredericki Church. Let's see. There we go. Fredericki Church lived between 1826 and 1990. So he was... That's incorrect. It's 1890. 1826 and 1890. My apologies. And was Thomas Cole's pupil during the last few years of his life. Now, Thomas Cole didn't live super long. He died when he was about 47. Church traveled way farther afield than his predecessors, and that's reflected in his art. He did a lot of paintings in South America. A lot more variety in his paintings. And those became super famous. He's very well known for those. And he later bought property near Cole and built a home there and called it Olana. And if you've used our museum passes, that might sound familiar because Olana is now a National Historic Landmark. And if you'd like to check that house out, which I highly recommend, it's super cool, LaGrange residents can tour Olana for free using one of our museum passes. More info on that later. Now, how exactly did this help conservation efforts? It planted a seed of an idea. Thomas Cole may not have lived to see any of the results of his efforts, but they're clear to us. People started paying attention, and that's what art's all about. It's all about eliciting an emotional response and bringing attention to something people might not have noticed. That seems to be a running theme. Now, people might not have had the resources or the knowledge to take action. This time period was a time when artists and writers and even politicians were paying attention to how beautiful America's natural landscape was. And the seed was planted in their heads that, hey, we should save at least some of this. And just as the Hudson Valley inspired these artists, their art inspired reverence for nature and others, and that helped spark the very beginnings of the American conservation philosophy, which is one that continues today. Cole didn't get to see the first national park form in 1872 or the National Park Service form in 1916, but I think he'd be proud of both of them. What do you think? Now, want to learn more? There are two things you can do. You can check out the Hudson River School Art Trail. Now, this is super cool. It allows you to visit some of the places that inspired the famous paintings of the Hudson River School artists. So you can stand in the exact place that artist stood and see the exact landscape that they felt so reverent about that they needed to paint it. You can go to hudsonriverschool.org to get started and to learn more. And if you'd like to take a day trip up to Olana, you can check out laglib.org/museumpasses.html to get more information about our museum passes. Or you can just give us a call. It's 452-3141 and ask us. We'd love to help. Now, as I said before, I had a bit more citations than can really fit on a slide properly, so if you would like them, I can definitely provide them. All right. That's all I have. I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow's presentation is all about how you can help conservation efforts right now in the Hudson Valley. I'll see you then. Have a great day, guys.